Somewhere in the middle of this past summer, you probably had a small thought and you let it go. You were watching a match, and something felt off. The break was longer than you remembered. There was music. There were lights. There was a countdown clock on the screen, like you were waiting for a commercial to end. And a quiet voice in the back of your head said, "This isn't quite the same game." Then the ball moved, and you forgot about it. I want to go back to that thought, because you were right. You weren't imagining it, and you weren't the only one. Football did not drift into that stadium by accident. It was rebuilt, deliberately, piece by piece, over 32 years, to fit a country that had never wanted it. Somewhere between 1994 and this summer, the people who own this sport looked at a map, looked at a market, and made a decision about what the game was allowed to become. Nobody voted on it. Nobody announced it. It arrived one small change at a time until the thing you grew up with was still wearing the same shirt and breathing differently. And the strangest part is not that America changed football, it's that football agreed. To understand what happened this summer, you have to go back to a country that did not care. 1988. FIFA hands the 1994 World Cup to the United States, a nation with no professional league, no stadium built for the sport, no television audience that could find the offside line with a flashlight. The rest of the world thought it was a joke. European journalists wrote it up as a punchline. Giving the World Cup to America was like handing over the Louvre to a company that sold souvenir keychains. But FIFA wasn't confused. FIFA was counting. Because there was one thing America had that no other country on earth could offer, and it wasn't passion for the game. It was infrastructure. 90,000-seat stadiums sitting empty most of the year, airports, hotels, highways, television networks with global reach, a machine already built to move human beings around and take money from them on the way. FIFA didn't need Americans to love football. FIFA needed America's plumbing. And here's where it gets interesting, because the deal was never one-sided. America said yes, but America came to the table with conditions. The first thing they changed was the shape of the tournament itself. For decades, World Cups worked on a simple principle. A group played its matches in the same city, or close to it. Fans landed, checked into a hotel, and stayed put. It was clean, it was cheap, it made sense. The Americans looked at that and saw money sitting still. Their argument was almost embarrassingly simple. If a team stays in one city, a fan buys one hotel room, eats at one set of restaurants, rents one car. If a team moves, that same fan buys 3 flights, 3 hotels, 3 weeks of meals in 3 different local economies. So they spread the tournament across the continent, made the teams travel, made the fans chase them. Think about what that actually means. The competition was redesigned, not to make the football better, but to make the fans spend more. The players' legs became a distribution system, and it worked. 1994 broke every attendance record in the history of the World Cup, and those records still stand. Not because Americans had suddenly fallen in love with the sport, because the country was engineered to fill seats. That model never went away. Every World Cup since has followed the American blueprint of movement. Russia, Brazil, South Africa. Teams crisscrossing enormous countries, fans dragging suitcases through airports, all of it presented as tradition when it was barely 30 years old. You've probably seen that pattern in your own life. Something gets introduced as a temporary adjustment, and 20 years later people defend it as the way things have always been done. But 1994 was only the opening move, and the changes were still mostly logistical. Nobody had touched the actual game yet. That came later. There were conversations in the early 90s, and this part is documented, about whether the sport itself needed surgery to survive American television. Ideas got floated. Bigger goals, so more balls went in. Splitting the match into quarters instead of halves, so networks could sell more advertising. Ending the possibility of a draw, because Americans allegedly could not tolerate a game where nobody wins. Most of those ideas died. Publicly, at least. FIFA said no. The game was the game. But something important happened in those rooms. A precedent was set. The rules of football stopped being sacred and became negotiable. Once you've had the conversation, once you've asked out loud whether the halves could become quarters, you can never fully unask it. That question sat there for 3 decades, patient, waiting for the right moment. And the right moment was a return trip. Because when FIFA came back to North America, it was not coming back to a country that had to be convinced. It was coming back to the single largest sports market on the planet, with a president who had spent his entire career expanding the tournament, selling the tournament, and monetizing every square inch of it. This time, nobody was going to say no. In January 2017, Gianni Infantino stood in front of the FIFA Council and proposed something that had never been done in the history of the sport. 48 teams. Not 32. The number the world had lived with since 1998. Not the modest bump most people expected. 48. A 50% increase arriving all at once. The reasons given in public were noble. More nations get to dream. Smaller federations finally get a seat. Football becomes truly global. Every word of it was carefully chosen, and every word of it was technically true. But the number wasn't chosen for romance. It was chosen because it fit. Here's what most people never learned about that decision. Expanding the tournament wasn't just about adding teams. It was about adding inventory. More teams means more matches. More matches means more broadcast slots, more ticketed events, more sponsor activations, more nights when a stadium somewhere is full and a camera is running. The 2022 tournament had 64 matches. This summer had 104. Sit with that number for a second. 40 extra matches, 40 extra products, created out of nothing but a vote. And the way FIFA got to that number tells you almost everything about how modern football is governed. The original plan was 16 groups of 3 teams. Clean, efficient. It would have kept the tournament at 80 matches. But 3-team groups have a fatal flaw that anyone who has ever played a card game understands instantly. In the final round, 2 teams play while one sits and watches, already knowing exactly what result would send both of them through and eliminate the third. The sport has a name for that scenario, and it comes from a match in 1982 between West Germany and Austria, where both teams figured out a score line that suited them and spent the last hour passing the ball sideways while a stadium booed. It was so embarrassing that FIFA changed the rules afterward so that final group matches would always be played simultaneously. 3-team groups would have brought that ghost back. So FIFA changed course, 12 groups of 4, which pushed the tournament to 104 matches. Notice what happened there. They fixed a competitive problem, and the fix happened to generate 24 additional matches. The right decision and the profitable decision pointed in the same direction. That is not always a coincidence. In this business, it almost never is. Not everyone applauded. The European Club Association pushed back hard. Javier Tebas, who runs Spain's professional league, said openly that the calendar had reached a breaking point. Their argument was straightforward and difficult to answer. Clubs pay the salaries. Clubs pay the medical bills. Clubs carry the risk when a player tears something in July and misses half a season. And then a tournament expands, the summer stretches longer, and the bill for all that extra football lands on somebody else's desk. FIFA's response to that pressure was, in its own way, brilliant. They wrote a check. $355 million distributed to clubs that released players for the tournament, up roughly 70% from the previous cycle. And for the first time, that money extended to clubs whose players appeared in qualifying but never reached the finals. Read that as what it was. The opposition had a legitimate grievance about player welfare and calendar congestion, and it was resolved with a payment, not with a compromise on the format, not with fewer matches, with money. This is the part people miss when they talk about football being ruined. Nobody in this story is twirling a mustache. Every single person involved is behaving rationally inside a system that rewards growth and punishes restraint. The clubs wanted compensation, and they got it. The smaller federations wanted access, and they got it. The host nations wanted an event so large it would change their relationship with the sport permanently, and they got it. And the fan sitting in a bar at 11 in the morning, watching a group stage match between 2 countries he could not place on a map, got something too. He got more football than any human being could possibly watch. Everyone got what they asked for. That's usually how these things happen. Not through a villain, but through 100 reasonable people saying yes to 100 reasonable things, and nobody standing far enough back to see the shape of what they were building. The shape only becomes visible later, usually when it's already finished. Block 4. The game itself. Here is where the story stops being about boardrooms and starts being about the 90 minutes you actually watched. Because a tournament can be expanded, relocated, and repackaged, and the football underneath it can still be football. Bigger stage, same game. That's what most people assumed was happening. But the game changed too. And it changed in a way that almost nobody noticed because it never arrived as a headline. Start with the referee. For a century, the man in the middle was silent. He made a decision, he pointed, and you spent the next 4 minutes arguing with a stranger about what he saw. That was part of the experience. The mystery was the product. Then video review arrived, and something uncomfortable happened. The review took time. Long, dead time. 60,000 people staring at a man with his hand on his earpiece, waiting. On television, it was worse. Silence. A crowd murmuring. Nothing to sell. American broadcasting has a very old rule about dead air. You do not leave it empty. You fill it. So the referee got a microphone. He now announces his decisions out loud, over the stadium speakers, the way an official does in the NFL. He explains what he saw and why he ruled the way he did. Some of them wear body cameras now, feeding a broadcast angle nobody has ever had before. The game seen from inside the whistle. Ask yourself how that feels. Because on paper, it's an improvement. More transparency. Fewer arguments. Nobody can reasonably defend the old system where 100 million people had no idea what just happened. And yet, something got traded away in that exchange, and it's hard to name. The argument was the point. The uncertainty was the point. You went home not knowing, and you carried it, and 30 years later, you could still get worked up about a call from a match your father took you to. That kind of grievance has a shelf life measured in decades. Certainty has a shelf life of about 90 seconds. Then there's the clock. A goalkeeper now has 8 seconds to release the ball. Hold it longer, and the other team gets a corner. That rule is real. It's written into the laws of the game, and it exists for one reason. Someone measured how much of a football match consists of nothing happening, and decided the number was too high. Think about what that represents. Time itself became a design problem. The sport's greatest structural oddity, a clock that runs forward and never stops, an ending nobody can predict, was quietly identified as inefficiency. And then there was the heat. This part was not planned by anyone, and it might be the most revealing thing about the whole summer. Matches were played in stadiums built for a sport that shuts down before the weather turns, in cities where a June afternoon can sit above 100 degrees. Players were cramping in the first half. Cooling breaks became routine rather than exceptional. Some matches were suspended entirely because of lightning, which is standard practice in American sports and nearly unheard of in football. So the rhythm broke. A sport whose entire identity is built on continuous flow, 45 unbroken minutes of it kept stopping for weather, for water, for review, for explanation. And every one of those stoppages is a container. Something goes inside it, a sponsor logo, a replay package, a brand moment on the big screen. None of this was designed as a conspiracy against the sport. That's what makes it hard to argue with. Every individual change had a defensible reason behind it. Player safety, transparency, fairness, fan experience. But stack them up and the shape underneath becomes visible. A game that used to run and run and run, now built with seams in it. And seams are where you sell things. You've watched this happen to something else in your life. Maybe it was the network you grew up on. Adding 4 minutes of advertising an hour until the show you loved was 17 minutes shorter than the show your parents watched. Maybe it was a stadium in your own city that changed names 3 times, then changed the name of the section you sat in. It never happens all at once. It happens with a reason attached to every single step, and the reason is always good enough to accept in the moment. The changes on the field, though, were only half of it. Because outside the lines, something far larger was being constructed, and that part was never subtle at all. There's a moment every fan has had. You look up the cost of a ticket for something you love, and the number on the screen doesn't make sense, so you refresh the page, thinking it's a mistake. It isn't a mistake. It's a system working exactly as designed. For most of its history, a World Cup ticket had a price. FIFA set it, printed it, and that was the price. Expensive, sometimes absurdly so, but fixed. You knew what the thing cost. This time the price moved. FIFA adopted dynamic pricing for the 2026 tournament, the same model airlines use, the same model hotels use, the same model that decides what you pay for a ride home on a rainy night. Demand goes up, the price goes up. A match that looked affordable in the morning could cost significantly more by evening, depending on who qualified, who got injured, and how many people were looking at the same screen you were. Understand what that changes philosophically, not just financially. Under a fixed price, everyone in the stadium paid the same to be there. The guy in row 40 and the guy next to him bought the same product for the same number. There was a kind of equality in it, even if the number was high. Under dynamic pricing, the stadium fills with people who paid wildly different amounts for identical seats. And the deciding factor isn't loyalty or timing or how far you traveled. It's how well you gamed the algorithm. The most devoted fan in the building might have paid the most, precisely because he waited to be sure his team would be playing. Devotion became a pricing vulnerability, and ticketing was only one revenue channel among many. FIFA partnered with Fanatics, the American retail giant, to handle merchandise at a scale the tournament had never attempted. Not a stand near the exit selling scarves, an integrated retail operation, physical and digital, designed so that the emotional peak of a match and the ability to purchase something arrive at the same moment. That's not an accident of placement, that's the entire science. The instant after your team scores, you are the most suggestible you will be all year. The infrastructure now exists to meet you exactly there. Then there was the final itself, a halftime show. At the World Cup final, musical performers, staging, production, the full American spectacle grafted onto the 15-minute break of the most watched sporting event on Earth. Now be honest with yourself here, because the easy reaction is outrage, and outrage isn't quite right. The Super Bowl halftime show is not a scandal. It's an institution. It's genuinely good television. Millions of Americans who cannot name a single offensive lineman watch that game specifically for those 12 minutes, and there's nothing wrong with that. It brings people in. It makes a sporting event into a shared national moment for people who don't follow sport. So why does it feel different when it happens to football? I think it's because of what halftime traditionally was. 15 minutes where nothing was sold to you, where the two most important conversations in the world were happening in rooms you couldn't see, and your job was to sit with your own nerves and wonder what was being said in there. That silence had a function. It let the tension build. The second half hit harder because you spent 15 minutes marinating in dread. Fill that space with production, and the dread has nowhere to live. Again, nobody did anything unreasonable. A broadcaster looked at 15 minutes of dead air in front of the largest audience in human history and thought, we could put something there. Anyone would think that. You would think that. I would think that. But here's the thing about filling every empty space. Empty space is where meaning collects. The pause before someone answers a hard question tells you more than the answer. The quiet in a house after everyone leaves tells you something the party never could. The silence between two people who've known each other 30 years is the whole relationship. Take away the gaps, and you don't get more. You get faster. There's a version of this argument that turns into an old man complaining that things used to be better. I want to be careful not to become that, because plenty of what changed genuinely improved the experience, and nostalgia is a liar that only remembers the good afternoons. But there's a question underneath all of it that nostalgia doesn't answer. If you keep optimizing something, at what point is it no longer the thing you are optimizing? Block 6. What the hosts got. There's an assumption buried in everything I've said so far, and it deserves to be dragged into the light. The assumption is that America won, that the United States sat across the table from FIFA, made its demands, reshaped the sport in its own image, and walked away with the prize. Big country flexes, world adjusts, story over. That's not what happened. And what actually happened is stranger and more human than that. Start with the field, because the field is honest in a way that press releases aren't. 3 host nations. Automatic qualification for all of them, a privilege carved out of CONCACAF's own allocation. 60 of the matches on American soil, 10 in Mexico, 10 in Canada, home crowds, home altitude, home time zones. Every structural advantage a host has ever been given, multiplied across 3 countries. And the final was Spain against Argentina. The third place match was England against France. Not one of the 3 host nations reached the last 4 of the tournament they built. Take a second with that because it's genuinely remarkable. You can redesign the format, you can redesign the schedule, the pricing, the broadcast, the halftime, the referee's microphone, the goalkeeper's 8 seconds. You can bend the entire architecture of the sport toward your market. You cannot bend the 90 minutes. That's the part nobody could buy. Spain played better. Argentina played better. England and France played better. And no amount of commercial engineering moved the ball an inch closer to a host nation's goal. There's something almost reassuring in that, if you're the kind of person who worries about what money does to things you love. But don't get sentimental too quickly, because the scoreboard was never the point. Infantino was asked years before the tournament what he wanted the legacy of 2026 to be. His answer was direct. That football becomes the #1 sport in North America. Measure the summer against that goal instead of the trophy, and the picture inverts completely. Because for the American market, this was never about a team lifting a cup. It was about a generation of kids spending 6 weeks with this sport at the center of their attention. It was about bars full at strange hours. It was about parents who couldn't explain the offside rule sitting next to 11-year-olds who could. It was about the sport stopping being foreign. 1994 did that once, and it produced Major League Soccer out of nothing. A league that had no business surviving, that lost money for years, that people openly mocked, and that now sits as a permanent fixture in American sport. 1994 planted something. This summer was the harvest, and it also planted again. So who won? The honest answer is that this wasn't a competition between America and football. It was a merger. And in a merger, both sides give something up, and both sides get something they couldn't build alone. Football gave up some of its silence, some of its uncertainty, some of its stubborn refusal to be convenient. America gave up something too, and this part gets discussed less. America had to accept a sport it cannot control. A sport where the clock doesn't stop for you, where a match can end nothing to nothing, and that's a legitimate result. Where your country can spend a decade preparing and go home in the quarterfinals to a nation with a fraction of your population. American sports are built so that the home league produces the world champion. Football is the only major sport where America has to show up as one nation among 200 and be measured against all of them on their terms with no guarantee whatsoever. That is a genuinely humbling arrangement for a country that isn't in the habit of being humbled. And millions of Americans spent this summer discovering they liked that feeling. That there's something clarifying about caring for something you can't buy your way to the top of. So the deal ran both ways. FIFA got the market, America got the sport. The open question, the one that won't resolve for another decade, is which side of that trade changed the other more. And there's one group in this story I haven't talked about yet. The ones who paid for all of it and never sat in a single meeting. Every story about money in sport eventually runs into the same wall. Everyone in it is enormous. FIFA, broadcasters, federations, clubs worth billions, retail conglomerates. And then there's the guy who set an alarm for 4 a.m. to watch a group stage match and who has been doing it since he was 9. He has no representation, there's no seat for him, there's no association that negotiates on his behalf, no lawyer, no line item in anyone's budget. He is simply assumed. The product is built on the certainty that he'll be there, and that certainty is so complete that it stops being treated as an achievement and starts being treated as a resource. I think that's the piece worth sitting with, because devotion in a system like this functions as raw material. It's the thing being extracted. And unlike oil, it doesn't send an invoice. Think about what that fan actually gave up over 30 years. He gave up knowing what a ticket costs. He gave up the local kickoff time because his match moved to whatever hour served a market on another continent. He gave up his club's shirt design every 12 months. He gave up the name of his stadium. He gave up the channel he used to watch it on, then the second channel, then the third, until following one competition required 4 separate subscriptions and a spreadsheet. At every step, he was told the change was for him. Better experience, better coverage, better access. And at every step, the price of the thing he loved went up, and the amount of it he owned went down. Now here's where I have to be fair, because there's a version of this that's just resentment dressed up as analysis. That same fan has more football available to him right now than any human being in history. He can watch leagues on 4 continents from his couch. He can see every angle of every goal within seconds. He knows more about tactics than professional coaches did 40 years ago. He has communities of people who care about exactly what he cares about, which he never had in a town of 9,000 people. The trade was real. He gave up ownership and received abundance. Whether that was a good deal is not something I can answer for him, and it's not something anyone should answer for anyone else. Plenty of people would take that trade twice. But there is a difference between a trade you made and a trade that was made around you. Nobody asked. That's the part. At no point in 32 years did anyone put the question to the people who fill the stadiums. Should the tournament be 48 teams? Should the price move by the hour? Should the referee narrate? Should there be a show at halftime of the final? The decisions were made in rooms, by people acting rationally in their own interests, and then delivered downward as improvements. And here's the mechanism that makes it work. The one that's genuinely clever. The fan cannot leave. That's the whole thing. That's the entire foundation. You cannot boycott the sport your father taught you. You can be furious about ticket prices and still be in your seat, because the alternative is not caring, and you've never once managed to not care. Loyalty that cannot be withdrawn is not leverage, it's collateral. There are versions of this in your own life, and they're not all about sport. The job you stayed in because the work mattered to you, while the conditions quietly worsened, and everyone knew you wouldn't leave. The town you kept living in, while it changed into something you didn't recognize, because it was still your town. The relationship where your reliability became the reason nobody had to try. Being the person who won't walk away is a good way to live, and a terrible negotiating position. So the summer happened, the stadiums filled, the records fell. The revenue reports will be extraordinary, and every one of those numbers will be presented as proof that people loved it. And people did love it. That's not a lie. But there's a difference between something being loved and something being good, and the gap between those two things is where an entire industry now lives. There's a question I've been circling for 7 blocks, and it's time to ask it directly. If this is what 32 years did, what does the next 10 look like? I want to be careful here, because prediction is where honest analysis usually goes to die. I don't know what's coming. Nobody does. But you can read the direction of a system by looking at what it rewards, and this system's incentives are not subtle. Consider what already exists. The tournament went from 32 teams to 48 in a single vote. There is already public conversation about 64 for the 100th anniversary edition. That idea has been floated seriously enough to draw objections from Confederation presidents, which tells you it isn't a joke. The Club World Cup expanded to 32 teams and moved to the United States. A biennial World Cup has been proposed openly more than once and shelved rather than rejected. The word shelved is doing heavy work in that sentence. Every one of those is the same move. Add inventory, add matches, add nights when a stadium is full and a camera is running. And each time the argument will be identical to the arguments that already worked. More nations get to dream. More kids get to see their flag. More access, more opportunity, more football. Those arguments are not lies. That's exactly why they're effective. Here's what I keep returning to. Scarcity was the original product. The World Cup mattered because it happened once every 4 years. 4 years is long enough for a child to grow visibly. Long enough for a great player to go from unknown to legend to finished. Long enough that you measure your own life against it, remembering where you were living and who you were with during each one. That interval was never a limitation. It was the engine. It's what made a single tournament carry the emotional weight of a quarter of a decade. You cannot manufacture that. You can only preserve it or spend it, and every expansion spends a little. The same logic operates in a stadium. A moment feels enormous partly because it's rare. Make it monthly, and the nervous system adapts. That's not sentiment, that's biology. Human beings habituate to everything. The most beautiful view in the world becomes wallpaper if you see it from your kitchen window every morning. So the risk isn't that football gets ruined. Nothing gets ruined. Football will be bigger in 10 years than it is today, by every measurable standard. More viewers, more revenue, more countries, more matches. The risk is that it becomes ambient, always on, always available, never absent, long enough to be missed. And a thing you never miss is a thing you eventually stop noticing. I don't say that as a prophecy. I say it as the visible direction of an incentive structure that has so far said yes to every opportunity to grow. There is a counter-argument, and it deserves airtime. The people running this are not fools. They understand dilution better than anyone. They've watched other sports oversaturate and pay for it. It's entirely possible that the brakes get applied before the thing that makes the World Cup special gets fully consumed. That's the optimistic reading. It requires believing that an institution built on growth will voluntarily choose less. History doesn't offer many examples of that, but it offers some. What I'm more certain of is this. The next set of decisions is being made right now, in rooms, by people who are reasonable, who have families, who genuinely believe they're stewards of something valuable. They will not think of themselves as taking anything from you. They almost never do. If you're still here with me at this point in the video, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel and come back with us. We're here every day, digging into stories like this one. And I say that knowing exactly who tends to make it this far into a 40-minute video about the economics of a sport. You're not here for highlights. You're here because something about this has been bothering you too. And you wanted to hear somebody put words on it. So let me give you the other half of the story, because I've spent 8 blocks on what was taken, and I owe you what survived. Something happened this summer that no committee planned, no sponsor bought, and no algorithm priced. A kid in Ohio who had never watched a full football match in his life sat down with his father because there was nothing else on, and by the 80th minute he was standing up. Nobody sold him that. It arrived free. A neighborhood somewhere in Queens emptied out at 10 in the morning on a weekday because a country of 4 million people had made it further than anyone expected, and the men in that neighborhood had been carrying that country in their chest for 30 years. A woman who moved to Texas in 1998 and hadn't heard her language spoken at volume in a public place in years, heard it in a bar from strangers, all at once. None of that is on a revenue report. All of it is the actual product. Here's the thing that the entire commercial apparatus depends on and cannot manufacture. Everything I've described in this video, the pricing, the expansion, the halftime show, the microphones, the merchandising, all of it is built on top of a phenomenon that exists whether or not anyone monetizes it. 22 people chase a ball. It goes in. 50,000 human beings make the same sound at the same instant, involuntarily, before their conscious minds catch up. That reaction predates money, it predates television, it predates FIFA by a considerable margin, and it will outlast all of them. You cannot dynamically price that. You cannot expand it. You cannot put a sponsor on it, though God knows people try because it doesn't live in the stadium. It lives in the nervous system of a person who decided, for no rational reason, to care. That's the piece that keeps getting underestimated by everyone who models this sport as a market. The suits in this story didn't create the passion. They found it. It was already there, generated for free by millions of people over a century, and their genius was building an extraction system on top of it, which means the passion was never theirs to ruin. I find that oddly stabilizing, because the pessimistic version of this story, the one that ends with football hollowed out and sold for parts, requires believing that the thing itself is fragile. It isn't. It's the most durable cultural phenomenon of the last 100 years. It survived 2 world wars, dictatorships that tried to weaponize it, corruption scandals that put executives in federal custody, and the sustained contempt of the largest economy on Earth for most of a century. Then that economy changed its mind, and what I'd argue actually happened this summer, underneath all the noise about rule changes and pricing models, is something the marketing departments would never phrase this way. America didn't conquer football. Football finally got in. After 100 years of being the sport that America politely ignored, the thing that other countries were passionate about, it walked into 11 American cities and found people waiting who did not know they'd been waiting. The commercial machinery was the price of admission. That's an uncomfortable sentence, and I don't have a way around it. To get into that market at that scale, the sport had to accept the terms of the market. Whether that was worth it depends entirely on what you think the point of all this was, and that question has an answer. It's just not one that shows up in a revenue report. I want to end where this started, with you on a couch, noticing something you couldn't name. You were right the whole time. The break was longer, the clock was there, the referee was talking. None of it was in your head. But here's what I've come to, having spent all this time inside it. Noticing is not the same as losing. The people who don't notice are the ones this system is actually built for. The ones who take whatever version arrives, assume it was always this way, and never feel the friction. That's the ideal customer, frictionless. You felt the friction, which means you're carrying a memory of something the current version doesn't include, and that memory has value that nobody has figured out how to price. 32 years ago, a decision was made to route this sport through a country that didn't want it. What came back was heavier, louder, more expensive, and more crowded than what went in. And also more alive, in more places than it has ever been. Both of those are true. Neither cancels the other. I've stopped needing them to. There's a thing I keep thinking about from the final. Spain and Argentina, extra time, 1 goal. Somewhere in that stadium there was a man who had paid 4 times what the person beside him paid because he'd waited until he was certain his team would be there. He didn't know that. He'd never know that. He was too busy standing. That's the entire story in one image, and I don't think it's a tragedy. I think it's just what it costs to be the kind of person who stands. You've been that person about something. Maybe not this. Maybe a team, maybe a place, maybe a person who never quite understood the size of what you were giving. You paid more than the guy next to you, and you didn't check the receipt. Because checking would have meant you were the kind of person who checks. The world has gotten very good at finding people like you. It has not gotten any better at replacing them. So watch the next expansion. Watch the next format change. The next partnership, the next improvement announced with genuine warmth by someone who believes it. They'll keep coming. The direction is set, and then, some evening, watch a goal go in. Watch 50,000 people make the same sound at the same instant before any of them decided to. Nobody sold them that. Nobody can. If this landed for you, do 3 things. Subscribe and stay with us. We're here every day. Send this to 5 people, not 5 random people. 5 who'd actually sit through 40 minutes of this, because those are getting harder to find. And you know exactly who they are. And leave me a comment, not a nice one, an honest one. Tell me where you think I got this wrong, because on a story this size, I got something wrong. Then tell me what to look at next. There's more in this tournament than one video can hold, and the best questions I get are the ones I never would have asked myself. I read them, all of them. See you in the next one.